One of the most criticised and honestly most hated PlayStation products of all time is starting to make a lot more sense right about now. And yes, I'm talking about the PlayStation Portal because gaming feels like it's in a really strange place right now. The industry is changing, prices are moving in, weird ways and directions people didn't expect. And the way we actually fit games into our lives doesn't look like the same way it did even just a few years ago, which is why I find it interesting that the PlayStation Portal, a device I honestly was unsure about at launch, has quietly started to feel like a smart buy as the world around it has changed. And in this video, I want to talk about why the PlayStation Portal makes so much sense right now without getting lost in tech specs, performance talk, or console wars chat. So first off, gaming is actually getting more expensive. It just doesn't feel more expensive than it used to be. It genuinely is. PlayStation has increased the price of its consoles by around $50 across the board. Xbox has massively pushed up the prices of both the Series S and the Series X consoles. The Switch 2 launched at a much higher price point than the original Switch did. And even if you look beyond traditional consoles, it gets even more wild. PC gaming handhelds are now launching at prices that I would have laughed at not that long ago. Devices like the Xbox ROG Ally X are, coming in for near enough around $1,000, and plenty of third-party handhelds are playing in that same price bracket. Then on top of all the hardware costs, publishers are clearly testing the waters with game pricing too. $70 games are now the norm, and we're starting to see attempts to push towards that $80 per game. We saw it with Mario Kart World. We're seeing it now. Microsoft tried it with Outer Worlds 2 and only backed down after significant pushback from players. And then who knows what GTA 6 is going to cost when it launches? Do you think it will be the first $100 game for the base version of the game? Let me know in the comments. So when you look at the current gaming landscape, almost every path into the gaming hobby is getting way more expensive. And that's where the PlayStation Portal starts to feel a little bit different. At around $200 or £200, depending on where you live in the world, the Portal gives you access to a huge library of PlayStation games, including PlayStation exclusives, without asking you to buy another full-blown console. For some people, that could be an entry point. You might be a more casual player who just wants access to great games without spending a fortune. And if you already own a PlayStation, it becomes a way to extend what you've already paid for rather than starting again from scratch with, another console or another dedicated handheld. Now, when the Portal launched at that price, a lot of people were understandably quite angry. At the time, it was seen as just a remote play device. But now that you can stream games from the cloud through PlayStation Plus and even games you own via the cloud, that value proposition shifts quite a bit. Suddenly, $200 or pounds for the Portal starts to look like a very reasonable price in a world where most other gaming options are becoming really expensive and a lot harder to justify. As long as you've got solid internet connection, that is, it's arguably one of the cheapest ways to access modern AAA console gaming right now. And with the way prices are going, it's probably only going to look like a better investment over time. Now, the biggest change for me with this device isn't any of its features, but it's actually the flexibility it offers. The Portal lets you play around life instead of, planning life around gaming. You can sit on the sofa while other people are watching the TV. You can play while visiting family. You can jump into a game for 20 minutes without it turning into a whole event where you're taking over, the living room TV. And just as importantly, it removes a lot of the friction that stops people from playing games at all. There's no fighting for the TV, no setup barrier, no I'll play it later moment that never actually happens. You just pick up your Portal and away you go, you're playing. It sounds small, but over time it completely changes how often you actually use your PlayStation 5 games library. It is a big win and one that can't be understated. If you have a Portal, you probably know what I'm talking about, so let me know in the comments and it will probably help out a lot of people who don't have a Portal understand one of the big benefits of this thing. Now, a few years ago, remote play was basically your only option for the PlayStation Portal, and honestly, it was good, but it wasn't the best. Early on, there was some issues. Some people noticed a micro stutter. There was connection drops depending on your setup, and the link between the Portal and your PlayStation 5 didn't always feel as strong as it should have been. It worked, but it didn't always, inspire that wow moment confidence in what you were playing and what you were seeing on screen. But since then, Sony has been consistently updating both the Portal and the PS5 software, and that experience has changed a lot. Remote play today feels genuinely good. It's smooth, it's responsive, it connects to your PlayStation 5 a lot quicker, and it no longer kind of feels like a bit of a novelty feature. It feels like a proper way to play your games. What's interesting though is that in my experience, cloud streaming actually feels slightly better than remote play still. This sounds backwards because you'd expect streaming from a console in your house to be better than streaming from Sony's data centers, but for me, the cloud often feels a little bit quicker and a little bit sharper overall. I don't exactly know what magic Sony is doing on the back end for this to be the case, but the cloud experience has quietly become excellent. That said, remote play is right there alongside it, and it's especially great if, like me, you still buy a lot of physical games. Come on, team physical games. You can just put your disc into the PS5, pick up the Portal, and you're playing your physical library on your little handheld here. That alone is huge. What really changes the feel of the Portal, though, is that cloud gaming didn't exist at all when this thing launched. We first got it through the cloud streaming beta, letting us play a selection of PlayStation Plus games, and since then it has matured even further and opened up even more options. You can now realistically own a PlayStation Portal without owning a PlayStation 5 at all. Pair it with a PlayStation Plus premium subscription, and you've got access to a solid library of games you can just stream and play right away on your device. If you don't want to buy a console right now, you're not sure, you want to commit, but you're just more a casual player who just wants to test the waters, this is actually a really compelling entry point into the PlayStation ecosystem. And at this point, the Portal starts to feel less like a remote play accessory and more like a proper handheld style way to play PlayStation games, even if technically it isn't a traditional console. Now, in my opinion, the single biggest update to the PlayStation Portal came with the 6.0 software update, and it's the update that really made this device start to feel like a standalone handheld because for the first time, you're no longer tied to owning a PlayStation 5 at all. What do I mean by this? Well, with this update, you can now buy PlayStation 5 games from the PlayStation Store and stream them directly from the cloud on your Portal. All you need is a PlayStation account, a PlayStation Plus premium subscription, and your Portal and a mobile phone. You do the whole purchasing process through your phone. You scan a QR code on your Portal, buy the game via the PlayStation app, pick up your Portal, and you're streaming that game from the cloud without ever touching a PlayStation 5. That is a massive decoupling from the console, and it completely changes how that $200 or £200 price point feels, in my opinion, because this device suddenly opens up far more than just a rotating curated subscription library of games you can play. You're not stuck playing older games, and you're not limited to whatever happens to be in the PlayStation Plus catalog that month. You can buy newer PlayStation 5 games, like games on launch day, as long as they're available for cloud streaming, that is, and you can jump in right away on the Portal. That is a big deal. That's one of the best parts, of being a console gamer, is when there is a big new release which drops and everyone is playing it at the same time, talking about it, sharing experiences. Portal owners who only own the Portal can now be part of that. You can buy a new PlayStation 5 game, like, Ghost of Yotai when it launched, and stream it from the cloud and be playing day one without owning a console at all. That is genuinely wild when you think about where the Portal started. For $200, that turns the cloud gaming on the Portal from a nice extra into a real option for people who want access to modern PlayStation games without committing to buying an expensive console. Right now, this only applies to native PlayStation 5 games, so it would be amazing to see Sony extend this to PlayStation 4 titles in the future, but even as it stands, this update is something nobody would have predicted when the Portal was announced as a remote play only device. I never saw this coming, but this is cool. The idea that just a couple of years later you could buy games and stream them straight from the cloud on a PlayStation Portal is pretty amazing. There is also a much bigger industry shift happening in the background that makes the Portal's design feel smarter now than it did a few years ago. And that is, high-end PC components, especially things like DDR5 RAM, are being hoovered up by AI data centers and enterprise customers working in the AI space. That demand is massive and is already pushing prices up across the board. We're even seeing reports of major memory manufacturers stepping back from selling large volumes of RAM to customers at all, so consumers like us, and instead prioritizing enterprise clients in the AI space. That's not great news for the future of gaming hardware. Building powerful local hardware like a console is only going to get more expensive, and the Portal mostly avoids all of that by design. This is not a powerful machine which is trying to brute force games locally. It's a really lightweight client and it streams the experience instead from servers, somewhere which Sony owns. That makes it lighter, simpler, far less tied to the constant escalation of hardware costs we're seeing elsewhere in the industry. There are even rumours that future Xbox hardware could be impacted by this, with suggestions that Microsoft hasn't stocked up enough RAM in the same way which Sony has done for the PS5, so the Series S and Series X might get another price increase. Sony reportedly bought huge amounts of memory early on to keep the PlayStation 5 production stable and prices consistent for now. But when you start thinking ahead to things like the PlayStation 6 or even a dedicated PlayStation 6 handheld, which I would love to get my hands on, it raises some pretty uncomfortable questions. What happens if the next generation of consoles ends up even more expensive than like the PlayStation 5 Pro? What if the entry level gaming hardware, so your base model PS6, is more expensive than the PS5 Pro? I don't know about you, but I want no part of that. Now, to be fair, we also don't yet know how rising hardware and data center costs might affect cloud gaming itself in the long term. If cloud gaming becomes massively more popular, could that eventually lead to higher PlayStation Plus premium subscription prices? I think it probably will, but right now it doesn't, and hopefully it stays that way. But in the meantime, it's hard to ignore how appealing it is to have a device you can pick up for around $200, pair it with a PlayStation Plus premium subscription, and suddenly have access to a huge library of modern PlayStation games. In a gaming world that feels like it's getting more expensive and more uncertain by the year, that kind of value is starting to feel really, really good and really rare. One of the biggest surprises for me has been how good the PlayStation Portal is at helping you actually get through your backlog. There are so many games that felt overwhelming to finish on a big TV, not because they weren't good, but because of time. Getting enough uninterrupted time in front of, the main TV in your house feels like a luxury these days, especially if you've got family, kids, or other people who want to use it. The Portal completely changes that. Instead of needing to take over the living room setup, you can take your games with you anywhere. You can be playing while chilling around the house, sitting on the sofa, while someone else is watching TV, or squeezing in a bit of gaming, wherever it fits, maybe before bed at night, or when you're chilling out in the bath. This thing is awesome. It also is really interesting for older games, and if you love your retro games, this is a great place to play it. PlayStation 1 games, PSP games, and PS2 era games look way sharper on the Portal's smaller screen. They look much closer to how you probably remember them when these same games are blown up on a massive modern TV. They can look pretty rough and show their age. On the Portal, they feel much, much cleaner, and it's way more enjoyable to revisit them. Now, all of this flexibility the Portal offers, quick games before bed, when you're chilling in the bath, grabbing a quick gaming session, when you normally wouldn't bother turning on a TV or console or TV on at all, it all adds up. I've made more progress through my backlog of games since owning the Portal than I did in the years before it arrived, for sure. Not because the games have changed, but because the way I access them has. It's let me squeeze gaming into my life without needing to block out the living room or, turn it into a whole event. And that has been a massive shift. When you put all that together, the PlayStation Portal starts to feel less like a weird, crazy experiment and more like one of Sony's smartest moves in a long time. It's not a super flashy device, it's not super expensive, and it's not trying to win any hardware arms race against, really expensive dedicated handhelds. And it definitely wasn't understood at launch. And to be honest, a lot of people still don't really understand it. But as gaming gets more expensive, more fragmented, and harder to fit into everyday life, the Portal quietly solves a problem a lot of players didn't even realize they had. The PlayStation Portal has changed a fair bit since launch with all the updates we mentioned previously, but what has really changed is the world around it, which is just full of tariffs and AI getting rammed into absolutely everything. And that's why right now it makes more sense than ever to pick up a PlayStation Portal. And if you're looking for some essential games to dive into on your Portal, check out the next video on screen now.